Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Sitting down here in the basement bait shop, just thinking about the couple of upcoming tournaments I've got. And it had me thinking about a question that I got from a viewer a while back regarding where do I start on a lake? Like when you go to a lake that's got a river section and a lower lake section, how do you choose between fishing, say, up the lake or fishing down the lake? And it's a really good question because a lot of lakes that we have are so big, it's really hard to say, okay, I'm going to go launch by the dam and then fish up by the river in the same day, just because there may be 40, 50, 60 miles between those two sections. Some lakes, a lot of the lakes we have here in Wisconsin are small flowages, so they're small reservoirs that might be 4,000 acres, and at that point you can fish both down lake and up the lake in the same day. So it allows you a little bit more freedom to sample different parts of the lake to figure out what you want to be fishing. But for me, there's a bunch of different things that I take into account regarding, do I feel like I want to fish up the lake or down the lake? Because in a lot of instances with me, I get two practice days to fish for a lake. Well, two days in a river section or 2 days on a lake section really is not much time. So if I want to spend one day up the river or one day down the lake, I'm really limiting my practice in each of those sections. So I like to have a good idea as to whether I want to go up the river or fish up the lake, or if I want to fish more down lake. So I've got a couple of reasons or things that I take into account when I'm trying to figure out where I want to fish. But the first thing I want to point out are just some of the characteristics regarding down lake or up lake. Generally speaking, you're going to have, in the colder water periods, you're going to have warmer water, the ability to have warmer water up the lake. So in your river sections where you have maybe some shallower backwaters, those will generally warm much faster, but you want to keep in mind that they will also cool down faster. So they are very much affected by air temperature and therefore can affect what you're after. Now, if you're talking about in the summer months when you have the warmest periods, if you have some current going through those areas, they're generally going to remain more stable in water temperature because the river itself, because it's constantly moving and the water is, going from top to bottom, is going to allow for cooler, more stable water temperatures. Down lake, you've got kind of the opposite, right? You've got much more volume of water, so therefore it takes a lot longer to warm up, it takes a lot longer to cool down. So if you're in the spring period and maybe the fish are up the lake are spawning already, down the lake they may not be spawning because the water's 10 degrees cooler. So depending on what type of fishing you want to do, you may want them to be in, say, pre-spawn, or you may want them to be in the spawn. The same thing kind of goes into effect, in the fall periods when you have the fall transition. They transition up the river a lot of times faster than they will in the major creek arms down lake, just because the water hasn't cooled off enough to have major shad migration. So there's a lot of different things you want to take into account just from a water temperature standpoint. Another big factor is water clarity. Generally speaking, up the rivers, you're going to have less water visibility. So you're going to have more turbidity in the water and just more color in the water, which for some anglers is a good thing. Some anglers would rather fish more water. It doesn't have to be mud. I'm just saying, you may have a foot or 2 feet of visibility, whereas down lake by the dam, you may have 10 feet of water visibility. I personally like clear water because one of the things I've mentioned before on this channel is I don't necessarily have to get the fish to bite. I can see the fish swimming if I'm going down a bank, and therefore I know that area has fish. Other anglers are pretty intimidated by clear water. If you didn't grow up with clear water like I did, it can be an extremely intimidating thing to fish. And therefore, those anglers may choose to go up the river because a lot of that is going to be off-colored water, shallower water fishing, more power fishing, and therefore it fits their strengths. And that leads me into another big difference between the two. Generally speaking, if you're fishing up the lake, you're fishing shallower water. It doesn't mean there's not deep water around, but when you mix in the fact that there's going to be some off-colored water, as well as the fact that it's normally flatter contour lines, a lot of the fishing is going to take place in 10 foot of water or less. So you may be fishing offshore still, but you're fishing relatively shallow water. When you have that really clear water that you get down lake, where you have the deepest water in the lake, a lot of times there's a much larger population of fish that live significantly deeper, way offshore, and you may be fishing 30, 40 foot of water. So again, it goes into what fits your strengths the most. And you got to keep in mind that all of this affects the way the fish live. In my opinion, you've kind of got down lake fish and then you have up lake fish. So you have the down lake fish, or fish that are much more willing to roam offshore, suspend offshore, chase shad balls around, use 30 foot of water, don't use the bank nearly as much. And up lake, you have less of those fish because those fish are going to choose to be down lake. And up the river, you have more fish that prefer dirty water. They like to get shallower. They like to, get up into cover. And it really comes down to fitting your strengths. So those are kind of the biggest differences, in my opinion, about up lake and down lake. And so the seasons are very relevant to where you want to choose to fish to fit your strengths. Not everyone's strengths are the same. For me, when I go to a lake, that's what I'm going to look at, is what is the time of year? Is it the spring? And if it's the spring, do I think the fish are going to be spawning up lake and still in pre-spawn down lake? Do I think they're going to be post-spawn up lake and spawn down lake? So that's something I got to figure out pretty quick, because I've got preferences. I'd rather fish pre-spawn fish, but I'd rather fish spawners versus post-spawn fish. So just depending on what's going on, I'm going to make a choice off of that. And then it kind of comes down to the fishery and watercolor. Like, would I rather fish dirtier water? Is this a lake where I feel comfortable chasing fish in super deep water? Or do I feel comfortable, would I rather power fish them up the river? So that's a big thing too. The last thing has to do with species. Depending on where you're at in the country, you may go to a lake that has a good smallmouth population. Like, this is common up here in the North Country. You have good smallmouth population in the river section and more largemouth in the lake section. And you go down south and you sometimes have the opposites of that, where you have good smallmouth in the lake and more largemouth up the river. And that's most smallmouth lakes down south are kind of that way. You have more smallmouth that live in the clearer water down by the dam. So depending on what species you want to target, whether it's just for fun fishing or whether it's a tournament and you're looking for what fish grow bigger, if you think the largemouth grow bigger than the smallmouth in a tournament, you're probably better off chasing the largemouth then. But if you're out just fun fishing and you think catching a 3-pound smallmouth is more fun than catching a 3-pound largemouth, then you target where the smallmouth are at. So you need to make those decisions. So once I've compiled all of that, what, water temp, stages of the fish's life cycle, what I think water clarity is going to be, because the water clarity too, sometimes you may want to fish up the river, but if there was a lot of recent rain, you may have chocolate milk rolling down the lake, and at that point that can really screw that up. So there's a lot of variables you want to take into account. Myself personally, I don't generally have one versus the other that I prefer. I am really one of those guys that, one tournament I'm up the river, the next tournament I'm fishing down by the dam, just because I feel very comfortable in all of those situations. Whereas other anglers may, they're always up the river or they're always down by the dam. So they've got a very, very much a preference as to what they fish. My suggestion to you guys would be to take into account all of the factors that I've mentioned and then match that up with what you're looking for. Would you rather power fish and fish dirtier water and fish in a certain stage of the year? Or would you rather fish the complete opposite down lake? Because it can be that drastic. There are some lakes you go to, it's very consistent throughout the lake. There's other lakes you go to where you got to be fishing 30 feet deep by the dam or 2 feet of water up the river. So you got to choose your strengths. And that's how I go about picking, guys. I really don't have a preference one way or the other. For me, in my tournament situations, it's all about where can I go to give myself the best chance to perform at the highest level. So I do like to sample. A lot of times I'll check both down lake and upriver and then just kind of make a choice based off of that practice time I had in both situations. But I hope this helps, guys. I hope it kind of gives you a little bit of background on where to choose where to fish on a lake at a certain time, because it really does come down to your personal preference. And if you did enjoy the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned. Another video coming out tomorrow.